This is Bethnal Green Tube Station. Bethnal Green is located in East London and is on the Central Line. Bethnal Green is the location of an horrific disaster during the Blitz of World War II. On the night of the 3rd of March 1943, an air raid siren sent hundreds of local residents towards the nearest underground station. An attack by the Luftwaffe was anticipated in retaliation for a recent bombing raid over Berlin, and the authorities were taking no chances. Underground stations were in use throughout London as mass shelters for Londoners who did not have shelters in their own homes or gardens. Bethnal Green was not actually in operation yet as a tube station, but was viewed as a useful mass shelter for the local residents. The area had very little light as blackout conditions were imposed by the air raid wardens. As people hurried down these narrow steps in the darkness, a woman and child stumbled and tripped a few steps on the bottom and started a chain reaction of people tumbling over each other from above. A huge crush of hundreds of people falling on top of each other in this confined space resulted in the deaths of 173 people, mostly women and children, crushed to death or suffocated on the steps of the tube station. The Bethnal Green tragedy is thought to be the largest loss of civilian life in a single incident during the Second World War. It is commemorated with this plaque and this statue called Stairway to Heaven outside the entrance, which has the names of the victims engraved upon it. The incident was covered up by the government and not published to the general public until after the war had ended, as it was felt it would damage civilian morale and make people reluctant to continue using underground stations as shelters. However, as tragic as the disaster was, it was not caused directly by enemy action. There is another incident in London which has been largely forgotten in the history of the Second World War, with a similar death toll of civilians, and was caused directly by a single bomb dropped by the Luftwaffe. This is the story of the Coronation Avenue bomb. And towards the end of this video, I will also include two unusual bomb sites in East London that hold special significance in London's wartime history of both World War I and World War II. Several years before the Bethnal Green tragedy, on the night of the 13th of October 1940, another air raid brought a wave of Luftwaffe bombers over the skies of London. One of those bombs fell here in a residential area of East London, Stoke Newington, and it fell on Coronation Avenue. The bomb that fell was responsible for the largest loss of civilian life as a direct result of enemy action on British soil. The death toll was close to the Bethnal Green tragedy at 160 men, women and children, and is commemorated by this plaque on the wall. Coronation Avenue and its adjacent housing block, Imperial Avenue, was a residential area with two 5-storey blocks of flats, around 150 properties per block, housing hundreds of people. The basement of these buildings were converted into a public air raid shelter. In much the same way as an underground station would be open to the general public during an air raid, the basement was open to both residents of the Coronation Avenue properties as well as other residents from the surrounding area. On the night of the 13th of October, an air raid siren sounded and hundreds of people crowded into the basement, which was divided into 3 sections. There were exits at each end of the shelter. At around 9 p.m, a huge 250-kilogram parachute bomb landed on one of the buildings and tore through all 5 floors and exploded in the basement. The entire building collapsed, and one of the exits of the shelter was blocked by rubble. The power cut out, so the entire shelter was plunged into darkness, and water and gas pipes were ruptured. One of the sections of the shelter was impossible to escape from, and those who survived the initial impact of the bomb were suffocated by the carbon monoxide gas seeping into the shelter. Some in the 3rd section, closest to the unblocked exit, did manage to escape, but water and raw sewage was flooding into the shelter, as much as several feet deep in places, and some unlucky victims drowned before they could escape. The BBC interviewed a survivor of the bombing who was a young boy at the time. This is his account. The Coronation Avenue buildings consisted of a terrace of about 15 shops with 5 stories of flats above. The shelter was beneath 3 of the shops. The back exit was in the yard between Coronation Avenue and another block of buildings called Imperial Avenue. We went over the road to the shelter whenever there was an air raid, and when the all clear surrounded in the morning, we would go back over the road, half asleep and very cold, and try to get back to sleep in a very cold bed. The shelter consisted of 3 rooms. The front entrance was in the first room, and the rear entrance was in the third room, which had bunk beds along one wall. The rooms were jam-packed with people, sitting on narrow, slatted benches. I would sit on a bench and fall asleep, and wake up every now and then, and would find myself snuggled up to my mother and sister. My father had the use of one of the bunk beds because the men were given priority as they had to go to work. On the 13th of October 1940, the shelter received a direct hit. We had settled down as usual when there was a dull thud, a sound of falling masonry, and then total darkness. Somebody lit a torch. The entrance to the next room was completely full of rubble, as if it had been stacked by hand. Very little rubble had come into our room. Suddenly I felt my feet getting very cold, and I realised that water was covering my shoes. We were at the end of the room, farthest from the exit. I noticed my father trying to wake the man in the bunk above him, but without success. A reinforcing steel beam in the ceiling had fallen down and was lying on him. The water was rising, and I started to make my way to the far end, where the emergency exit was situated. Everybody seemed calm, with no shouting or screaming. By the time I got to the far end, the water was almost up to my waist, and there was a small crowd clambering up a steel ladder in a very orderly manner. Being a little more athletic than some of them, and very scared, I clambered up onto the back of the ladder to the top, swung over, and came out into the open. The residential blocks at Coronation Avenue and Imperial Avenue have been rebuilt now, and all that remains, as a reminder of this tragedy, is this plaque on the wall. This area of East London has 2 other bomb sites that have special significance to the history of wartime London. Our first is just a short walk from Coronation Avenue at number 16 Alcombe Road. This is the location of the first bomb of the First World War. It would be the first time in history that an aerial bomb would ever fall on British soil, and is commemorated with this plaque high up on the wall. The second site is not far away in Stepney. On the 27th of March 1945, 10 months after the D-Day landings, and just 6 months from the end of the Second World War, a V-2 rocket was launched from the German battery in the Netherlands. The V-2 rocket was not dropped from an aircraft and was a demonstration of the advances of German technology. It has sometimes been suggested that if the Germans had the V-2 rockets earlier, it might have changed the course of the war. This flying bomb struck the Hughes mansions in Valence Road. The building that was destroyed has never been rebuilt and was located on the site of this memorial to the victims of this attack. The death toll was huge. 134 men, women and children died in this attack. This would be the location of the last bomb to hit Britain during the Second World War, and also the last time an aerial bomb has ever landed on the British mainland. There was another V-2 bomb on the same day that hit Orpington in Kent and killed 1 civilian. However, there is some confusion as to the timings of the 2 bombs and which one was officially the last. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and check out the other videos on the Offbeat London channel.